Hey, what's up you guys? You're watching Team APS, and in today's video I'm going to be answering a question that I get asked all the time, and that's, Paul, what deck should I play? So people ask me this on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube comments all the time. What deck do they need to use? What deck should they play? Sometimes it's new players, sometimes it's old players. There's so many decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! And so many different things that all of them do that it's a really tough question to answer. But I think that I kind of have a decent idea of how I can maybe explain to people best what decks they should play, or maybe what decks they should gravitate towards, give them a good idea of what fits with kind of what they're looking for. So I'd like to start, of course, by saying that, these are just my suggestions. I tried to pick decks that are fairly recent and, fairly capable of competing. I don't want to suggest something like super old. But, yeah, the first thing that's important to mention is that, you gotta kind of consider what your playstyle is. What do you like to do in Yu-Gi-Oh? What do you do well? Do you like a high risk, high return sort of strategy? Do you like combo decks versus archetypes? Do you like sort of speed versus control? Do you just sort of like to troll your opponent? And just, those are things that really do factor into what you want to play. So I've got my note card. It's got a lot of different decks on it. I'm going to just sort of describe criteria and give suggestions based off of that. But remember, these are just my opinions and they could be completely wrong. You're always free to choose whatever deck you want to play in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's not me playing, it's you. So, yeah, let's get started. So let's first start with sort of the high risk, high return style decks. There are a couple of different kinds of these. This is for the type of player who really likes to kind of bet it all on, the roll of the die type of, play style. And so these are decks that usually bet it all on a little bit of luck, but also if you're lucky, you end up kind of just exploding and destroying your opponent really quickly. An obvious deck that comes to mind is Infernoids. Infernoids are based on milling, sort of. Well, they're based on getting their monsters into the grave. They banish them and summon themselves back from the grave or from the hand, and so it's a very cool mechanic. You can sort of swarm the field with them, and they're really big and have some powerful effects. But the thing is, the deck largely relies on cards like Reasoning and getting a lucky Reasoning mill. If your opponent calls a, level that, like 3 or 4, and you hit, say, a Raiden or a Mathematician or whatever you're running that's level 3 or 4, then you're in trouble. But if they call it and you end up milling like 10 Infernoid monsters before that happens, then you're in great shape. So it's very high risk, high return. It might work, it might not. It's proven to be a very powerful strategy. It won YCS Dallas, but it's also proven to be capable of completely flopping. So it's very high risk, high reward. Other similar decks, I'm reading off my list here, might actually be something like Lightsworns, which is a little bit older, but it functions on a similar premise. They're the ones that are really more about milling. All of them kind of have an effect that makes you mill cards during your end phase or to like activate their effects or whatever. And depending on what you mill, you'll either do really well or you won't. If you mill cards like Fellis or Wolf, they get to summon themselves. You get pluses off of that. You want your cards to get milled so you can quickly summon stuff like Judgment Dragon and quickly set up your plays with cards like Lumina. If you get bad mills, though, you'll end up milling lots of spells and traps, and that's never fun. It's also kind of got an ability to brick rather easily because of this. So Lightsworns is another similar deck that's kind of high risk, high return. So on a similar-ish note to high risk, high return decks, we're going to move on to decks that are, I don't want to call these, one-trick ponies or anything like that, but we'll call them sort of like turbo decks that are very, these are sort of for the player, I guess, who likes to quickly speed into a single strategy, and once that strategy works, they do really well, but if that strategy kind of flops, then they don't do very well. So you could say it's similar to Infernoids, and if you don't really get what I'm saying, I'm talking about decks like Synchrons, sort of the quick draw Synchron decks and stuff with Level Eater and Junk Synchron. They usually go into cards like Quasar Dragon or Stardust Warrior or, big monsters like that after a long drawn out process of summoning and combos. Like I said, these aren't my recommended type of decks. I don't particularly enjoy playing them. I feel like the amount of steps involved can sometimes mean there's a lot more space to misplay, misjudge a level count, something like that. But also they tend to be very, very susceptible to cards like Vanity's Emptiness, things like that. And also just sort of like if one play gets broken up, sometimes that's it. Like if say your Stardust or your Quasar gets answered, then usually the deck just is out of steam at that point. And so that's why I tend not to like those types of decks. But Similar ones might include Lavals, which can do some similar things, and can't think of another great example. I haven't really put that on the list. But those are sort of, that for those type of players, those are very good decks. Another kind is just sort of the typical combo deck, usually faster paced decks. These I like to think of kind of what Shadal's and the Cross were last format, not so much anymore. But there are also things like Mermails, Madolche. They're archetypes, but they are still combo decks in the sense that there are a couple different ways to play them. They're very flexible. These tend to be kind of my favorite decks because you can always sort of play your way out of most situations. It's kind of a multi-headed monster sort of thing. You know, if you get shut out by one thing, you usually have multiple plays you can do that turn. And there are quite a lot of these. Like I said, I have a list. I've got, like, you know, Madolche. Mermails are pretty similar. Sylvans are in a similar vein, maybe not quite as competitive as the other ones. Necroz Shadals. And yeah, so those are some of the ones I have, but there are also a few others. I mean, you could even consider something like Ritual Beast to fit into this category, or Black Wings. I like to kind of almost call those the more well-rounded ones, though, which is sort of the next type of thing. If you're the player who kind of wants to be able to make a variety of plays, but sort of be able to go offensive or kind of go defensive when you want, then maybe something like Burning Abyss is better for you. Or Fire Fist, something that's slightly slower paced, but still has the ability to be aggressive or defensive when it needs to be. I think that Heroes actually kind of fit pretty well into this bill. Cleaforts, Yang Zing, Ultra Athletes. These are decks that are maybe a little bit more of a middle ground. Geargi is another great example. All these decks, I think, they're similar to the faster combo decks, but they're just ever so slightly slower, but kind of have a little bit more resilience. And kind of the similarity between all of those decks is that they usually have a good amount of steam. They're usually fairly consistent. They're very just all around good decks. So those are good. Now for some of the other strategies, maybe you're kind of more of a slow-paced control player. You really just kind of want to, like, stop what your opponent's doing, kind of control the pace, control the tempo of the match. And for people like that, I actually recommend stuff like Boojins. Boojins is a great place to start. Boojins are just sort of more of a, like, stay back type of deck. You know, they have their monsters that just protect their Boojins. Turtle, Hare, what's the one that happens from the hand? Crane. You basically protect your Yamato and you use kind of floodgate cards and just keep your opponent out. Other great examples are Yosenju. Yosenju's a similar one. Spellbooks could sort of fall into that category if you really wanted them to. They're also a deck that kind of can just sort of wall your opponent out. Arrow Mage is another good example of that. Do I have anything else in here? Yeah, those are all pretty good examples. Volcanics even, stuff like that. Decks that just kind of, they tend to run a lot more back row, and so if you're into cards like, you know, your Fiendish Chains and your D-Prisons, and you kind of just like your Floodgates, these decks all tend to do pretty well using Floodgates. So Taylor Knights might even kind of qualify under that too. So these are good decks if you kind of like to control your opponent, control the pace, kind of play a little bit more of an anti-meta style. And then we kind of move on to the more like, I hate my opponent, I want to troll them style decks. So this might actually get more into the Psy-Frame territory where, you know, you just aren't really a fan of your opponent's stuff and you just kind of want to stop them all the time. And when you look at it that way, yeah, Psy-Frames kind of fit into that category. And still some of the other decks that I mentioned earlier do, but Psy-Frames kind of come to mind. And then there's just like lots of sort of miscellaneous stuff. Decks like Gem Knights, decks like Ritual Beast, Fluffles, where it's kind of hard to fit them into one particular category. They can do a lot of different things. You know, Ritual Beast can just wall out really well when they need to, or they can like loop cards. I didn't really know where to fit those. Gem Knights are more than capable of OTKing. You've got stuff like Ignites that's just kind of an odd to place deck because of the way it works. You can run it either really defensively with those traps, I forget the trap, but you like tribute monsters and it stops like summons. Or you can, you know, do the Royal Magical Library Turbo version. Maybe in a similar vein to Psy-Frames would be something like Dark World, just very disruptive deck that people tend not to like facing, but it's still, you know, a viable threat in its own right. And so I don't think I really missed anything on this list, but if you like maybe decks that float a lot, Shadal's, Burning Abyss, Yang Zing in a way, those are all good suggestions for that. It's really kind of a tough question, but I hope that this video provided a little bit more insight and gave you kind of a few more ideas for how to pick a deck to play. Like I said, it's all about kind of knowing what your playstyle is, what things you like to do, how you like to play, what you do best, and kind of what you don't like to do. Like I always tell players who, if you're the type of person who likes to kind of hide behind your trap cards, then you don't really want to be playing a fast, crazy deck like Mermails or something like, you know, Gym Knights. But if you kind of like to be able to kind of stay back, then maybe Girgia, Bujin, Spellbooks. There's kind of a continuum here where, you know, there's a kind of a far end and like a not so far end, so it can kind of go between decks, kind of fall. If you've ever seen like those fighting game tier lists where it's like and like some characters rank high up or down or left or right, and so like decks might be here and here and here and here. But I hope this gave you a good sort of starting base. Remember guys, in the comments, if you have any suggestions, just leave them. This could be a great forum to discuss things and suggest decks for people and help them out. I love comment sections that are, you know, good community. And speaking of community, you can join the Team APS community. It's a Facebook group that my fans started. It's really chill. You can join that. Follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitch. This month I'm giving away a box of Dimension of Chaos. You can enter that giveaway down in the description. It's brought to you by TCG Player, my sponsor. And that's all. So hope this helped you guys out, and I'll catch you guys later. See ya.